My name is Edwin, and at 32, I never imagined putting my entire life on pause. When my mom suffered a severe stroke, I left behind my software development career, my Seattle apartment, and my girlfriend to become her full-time caregiver. For a whole year, I sacrificed everything to help her recover. The thanks I got. My parents handed me a bill for rent and utilities. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on this family betrayal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you have ever felt taken for granted by the people who should appreciate you most. Before my world turned upside down, I had everything figured out. I was thriving as a senior software developer at a promising tech startup in Seattle, creating innovative apps that were gaining serious market attention. My girlfriend Tara and I had been together for 3 years, sharing a modern apartment overlooking Lake Union. I had even started ring shopping, planning to propose on our upcoming vacation to Hawaii. Life was good, predictable, and completely on track. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember because I was in the middle of debugging a particularly frustrating piece of code when my phone vibrated with my father's number. Dad rarely called during work hours, so immediately I felt something was wrong. "Edwin, your mother had a stroke," he said, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "A bad one. She is stable now, but the doctors say the road to recovery will be long." My mind went blank. Mom was only 59, relatively healthy aside from mild hypertension that she managed with medication. I caught the first flight back to my hometown in Pennsylvania, arriving at the hospital to find my mother almost unrecognizable. The right side of her body was paralyzed, her speech slurred to the point of incomprehensibility, and the vibrant spark that defined her personality seemed dimmed behind confused, frightened eyes. The doctors laid out a recovery plan that was overwhelming in its complexity. Mom would need months of intensive physical therapy, speech therapy, constant medication management, and round-the-clock supervision for even the most basic activities like eating, bathing, and using the bathroom. The following day, my father called a family meeting at the hospital cafeteria. My sister Natalie joined via video call from Boston, where she lived with her husband and 2 young children. Dad looked exhausted, the creases in his face deeper than I remembered. "I cannot take time off work," he explained, running his hand through his thinning gray hair. "The accounting firm is in our busiest season, and frankly, we need my income more than ever with these medical bills." Natalie spoke up immediately. "I wish I could help more, but moving to Pennsylvania is impossible right now. Jake just got promoted, the kids are settled in school, and we just bought our house last year." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of expectation before anyone said a word. "Edwin," my father said carefully, "your mother needs someone and you have always been her favorite." He attempted a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Could you possibly take a short leave from your job? Just until we can figure out a more permanent solution." The short leave and temporary solution part is what got me. I truly believed I would be there for a few weeks, maybe a month, helping my mother through the initial recovery before professional help or a more sustainable family arrangement could be established. That evening I called my boss, explaining the situation. To his credit, he was understanding. "Family comes first, Edwin. We can hold your position for 6 months under family medical leave. After that, we will need to reevaluate based on the business needs." 6 months seemed generous and surely enough time. I called Tara next, breaking the news that I would be staying in Pennsylvania indefinitely. "How long is indefinitely?" she asked, her voice small. "A few weeks, maybe a month or 2 at most," I assured her, believing it myself. "My job is secure for 6 months, but I will be back way before then." Tara was supportive, promising to wait and even offering to fly out for weekends when possible. I felt lucky to have her understanding, even as a nagging voice reminded me that long distance had strained many stronger relationships than ours. I packed up enough clothes for what I thought would be a short stay, sublet my apartment to a coworker, and left my life in Seattle on what I genuinely believed was a temporary pause. When I arrived at my childhood home, it felt strange to be back as an adult, especially under such circumstances. The house seemed smaller, dated in a way I had not noticed during holiday visits. My father had converted the home office into a bedroom for my mother, installing a hospital bed and various medical equipment. "We are so grateful you are here," my father said as he showed me around. "Your mother will be discharged tomorrow, and the nurses have some training for us on her care needs." I nodded, still operating under the assumption that my presence was a stopgap, that my parents recognized the enormous sacrifice I was making, and that my contribution would be met with appropriate gratitude and support. That first night sleeping in my old bedroom with posters from high school still on the walls, I felt confident in my decision. This was what family did for each other in times of crisis. I would help my mother recover, strengthen my relationship with my parents during this difficult time, and then return to my real life with the knowledge that I had done the right thing when it mattered most. I had no idea what I was actually in for, or how dramatically my sacrifice would be taken for granted by the very people I had put my entire life on hold to help. The reality of caregiving hit me like a truck that first week. The 2-hour training the hospital provided before discharging my mother barely scratched the surface of what caring for a stroke patient actually entailed. I quickly found myself responsible for a dizzying array of medical tasks I had no preparation for. Each morning began at 6 a.m. with medication management, a complex routine of pills that had to be given at precise times with specific food requirements. Then came the physical challenges, helping my mother from the bed to her wheelchair, assisting with toileting needs, sponge baths, and dressing her uncooperative body, half of which refused to follow her brain's commands. 3 times daily I had to perform physical therapy exercises the hospital had prescribed, manipulating her limbs through motions that clearly caused her pain despite my best efforts to be gentle. The first time I made her cry out, I nearly quit on the spot, but the alternative of her muscles atrophying from disuse was worse. Speech therapy was equally challenging. Mom would grow frustrated when I could not understand her slurred attempts at communication, sometimes giving up and turning away from me in defeat. I spent hours researching stroke recovery techniques online, printing flashcards, and developing communication systems to bridge the gap between what she wanted to say and what she could actually articulate. Nights were perhaps the worst. Mom frequently woke disoriented, sometimes attempting to get out of bed without assistance, risking dangerous falls. I moved a futon into her room, sleeping so lightly that the slightest sound would jolt me awake. Uninterrupted sleep became a distant memory. Throughout all of this, my father became increasingly absent. He left for work before I woke and often returned after dinner, claiming late meetings or important client deadlines. Weekends, which I had hoped would provide some respite, instead found him on the golf course with colleagues, explaining that maintaining business relationships was crucial to our financial security during this crisis. "Your mother is in good hands with you," he would say, patting my shoulder before heading out the door in his golf attire. "You have such a natural talent for this caregiving stuff." His praise rang hollow when not accompanied by actual assistance. The natural talent, he observed, was actually exhausting work and constant research to ensure I was providing proper care. More frustrating was how he presented my caregiving to others as a fortunate coincidence rather than a massive sacrifice. My sister Natalie called every Sunday without fail, video chatting for precisely 10 minutes before some obligation invariably pulled her away. She would speak to Mom for most of that time, leaving just enough minutes to ask me how things were going without actually waiting for an in-depth answer. "You are such a saint for doing this, Edwin," she would say, her perfect Boston home visible in the background. "I wish I could help more, but you know how it is with the kids and everything." 4 weeks into my caregiving role, I had to apply for an extension on my family medical leave. My company expressed the first hint of concern about my prolonged absence. "The team misses you," my boss said during our call. "And to be frank, your project has been reassigned." We are still holding a position for you, but I want to be transparent that it might not be the same role when you return." That news was the first real indication that my professional life was beginning to unravel, but I pushed the worry aside. Mom was showing small signs of improvement, managing to speak short sentences more clearly and gaining some movement in her affected arm. These victories, though minor, felt significant enough to justify the sacrifices. By the 2-month mark, my savings had begun to dwindle alarmingly. Without income and with my Seattle apartment still requiring partial rent coverage despite the sublease, my financial cushion was disappearing fast. I attempted to discuss finances with my father, suggesting that perhaps I should be compensated for providing full-time care that would otherwise cost thousands in professional services. "Your mother and I are already stretched thin with the medical expenses," he replied dismissively. "Besides, you are not paying rent or groceries here. It all evens out." That was the first time I realized my parents were calculating a mental balance sheet, with my caregiving on one side and their provision of room and board on the other, as though I were choosing to live with them rather than making an enormous sacrifice. Meanwhile, Tara's calls became less frequent, our conversations increasingly strained. The easy banter that had characterized our relationship was replaced by awkward pauses and updates that revealed how rapidly our lives were diverging. She spoke of office politics and weekend brunches with friends, while my days revolved around medication schedules and celebrating when Mom successfully held a spoon. "I miss you," she would say at the end of each call, but the words carried a different weight now, tinged with something that sounded increasingly like goodbye. The promised few weeks had stretched into months with no end in sight. What hurt most was that neither my parents nor my sister acknowledged the extent of what I had given up. There were no meaningful thank yous, no offers to find ways to lighten my load, no recognition that my entire life had been put on indefinite hold. Instead, my care was treated as expected, my presence taken for granted, and my sacrifice viewed as simply what a good son should do. 3 months into my caregiving journey, I received an email that confirmed what I had begun to fear. My company could only hold my position for 3 more months, after which they would need to officially replace me. They offered a generous severance package if I chose to resign now rather than later, a tacit acknowledgement that they did not expect me to return. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I submitted my resignation. The severance would provide some financial cushion, and the reality was that my mother's needs still required full-time care. The weight of this decision, effectively derailing my career trajectory, sat heavy in my chest as I typed out my resignation letter, but what choice did I have? I did not tell my parents about resigning immediately. Somehow, admitting that I had sacrificed my career made the situation too real, too permanent. Instead, I continued the charade of taking leave, while privately grieving the loss of the professional identity I had spent years building. The following week brought another blow. Tara called on a Sunday evening, her voice carrying a resolve that I recognized immediately. "Edwin, we need to talk," she began, and my stomach dropped. "I love you, I really do, but this situation has no end date. We are living completely different lives now, and it is not fair to either of us to pretend otherwise." I wanted to argue, to promise that I would be back soon, but the words stuck in my throat. I could not make promises I had no power to keep. "I understand," I finally said, though understanding did nothing to dull the pain. "You are doing something incredible for your family," she added softly. "It is one of the reasons I fell in love with you, your capacity for selflessness. But I need to be honest about where I am in life right now." After we hung up, I sat in the backyard until well past midnight, watching the stars and mourning yet another piece of my former life that had slipped away. The holidays arrived, bringing my sister Natalie home for her annual 2-day visit. My parents transformed in her presence, my father taking time off work and my mother making visible efforts to appear stronger and more recovered than she actually was. What stung was how Natalie was treated as a returning hero for taking 2 days out of her year to visit, while my continuous presence and care were simply expected. It is so wonderful to have both our children home, my father announced at dinner, raising his glass. And special thanks to Natalie for making the long trip despite her busy schedule. Your mother and I appreciate the emotional support you provide, even from Boston. I nearly choked on my food. Emotional support. She called for 10 minutes a week and visited twice a year. Meanwhile, I had given up everything, a fact that went unacknowledged. Later that evening, I overheard my father talking to a relative on the phone in the kitchen. No, it worked out perfectly. Edwin was between jobs anyway, so the timing was actually quite fortunate for everyone. Between jobs. The casual erasure of my thriving career and deliberate sacrifice made my blood boil. In that moment, I realized my parents had constructed a narrative that minimized what I had given up to care for my mother. Perhaps it was easier for them to believe I had nothing better to do than to acknowledge the debt they owed me. After Natalie left, the household returned to its familiar routine, but with one significant change. My mother's condition was genuinely improving. She could now walk short distances with a walker, feed herself with her unaffected hand, and communicate much more clearly. The doctors were pleased with her progress, attributing her remarkable recovery to the consistent, dedicated care she received at home. "You have saved us a fortune in professional nursing care," my father remarked casually one evening. A skilled nurse would cost at least $40 an hour. It was the first acknowledgement of the monetary value of my care, yet somehow framed as a savings to my parents rather than a service I had provided at great personal cost. When I attempted to discuss a timeline for transitioning my mother to part-time professional care so I could begin rebuilding my life, my father shut down the conversation immediately. "Your mother is comfortable with you," he said firmly. "Outside caregivers would be a disruption to her progress. Besides, where would you go? Back to Seattle with no job." His words felt like a trap closing around me. He had taken my sacrifice and used it to justify expecting even more, leveraging the very losses I had suffered as reasons why I should continue indefinitely. The isolation grew more profound. Friends from Seattle gradually stopped calling. My social media feeds showed life continuing without me, colleagues getting promotions, friends getting engaged, buying homes, taking vacations. My dating life had become non-existent, my professional network withering, and my future increasingly uncertain. Natalie would occasionally call with what she clearly considered motivational pep talks. "This challenging time won't last forever," she would say. "Mom is getting better every day because of you. Our family is so blessed to have someone willing to put their life on hold like this." Her words, meant to encourage, only highlighted how fundamentally she misunderstood my situation. This wasn't a brief pause. It was a complete derailment with no clear path back to my previous life. As the 6-month mark approached, my parents began to subtly criticize my caregiving methods, despite my mother's obvious progress. My father questioned whether I was pushing the physical therapy exercises hard enough. My mother complained that I sometimes seemed tired or distracted. The implicit message was clear. Not only was my care expected, but it should be delivered with unwavering enthusiasm and gratitude for the opportunity to provide it. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I began documenting everything I did as a caregiver in a detailed log. Initially, it was just to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining the workload, but soon it evolved into something more comprehensive. I recorded hours spent on direct care, driving to medical appointments, researching treatment options, and preparing specialized meals according to the dietitian's instructions. Out of curiosity, I researched the market rates for each service I provided. Professional caregivers charged between $25 and $40 per hour depending on medical training. Physical therapy assistants earned similar amounts. Medication management, transportation, meal preparation, and round-the-clock supervision all had quantifiable market values. As I compiled this information, a sobering awareness grew. If my parents had hired professionals for the care I provided, they would have paid well over $90,000 for the past 6 months alone. Yet somehow, my contribution was considered roughly equivalent to the spare bedroom and groceries they provided. This realization didn't immediately translate into anger. Instead, it planted a seed of clarity about just how profoundly my generosity was being exploited by the people who should have been most grateful for it. For the first time, I began to consider what it would look like to stand up for myself and demand the recognition and respect my sacrifice deserved. 6 months into my role as full-time caregiver, I discovered something that shifted my perspective permanently. While searching for an insurance document in my father's home office, I came across a bank statement showing monthly transfers of $1,200 to my sister Natalie, labeled mortgage assistance. The most recent transfer had been made just 3 days earlier. I sat staring at the paper, a cold realization spreading through me. My father had repeatedly claimed financial strain as the reason we couldn't afford even part-time professional help for my mother. Yet here was evidence that he had been subsidizing my sister's Boston mortgage, the same sister who was too busy to provide anything beyond emotional support for our mother's recovery. That evening, I observed my mother more objectively than I had in months. She was now able to walk independently with her walker, manage most self-care with minimal assistance, and communicate effectively despite occasional word-finding difficulties. Her recovery, while not complete, had progressed remarkably well. According to her neurologist, she had exceeded expectations for 6 months post-severe stroke. I should have felt only pride in this achievement, but instead, I felt a growing resentment. I had sacrificed everything to facilitate this recovery, while my family had offered little recognition and actively misrepresented the situation to minimize their obligation to me. That night, I began secretly applying for jobs during the few hours I had to myself after my mother went to sleep. I updated my resume, reaching out to former colleagues for references. To my surprise, I received several promising responses, including 2 interview requests. The tech industry was still booming, and my skills remained valuable despite the gap in employment. But each opportunity presented the same fundamental problem. I couldn't accept a position while still serving as my mother's primary caregiver, and I had no exit strategy from my current situation. The following week, I attempted to discuss transitioning to part-time caregiving with my father, suggesting we hire help for just 20 hours a week so I could begin interviewing and rebuilding my career. "We simply can't afford outside help right now," he said dismissively. "The medical expenses have already stretched us thin." "What about the money you send to Natalie each month?" I asked, finally revealing what I had discovered. His face hardened. "That's different. She and Jake are just starting out, and Boston real estate is expensive. Besides, your sister contributes in other ways." "What ways exactly?" I pressed. "Emotional support is just as important as physical presence," he insisted. "Your sister calls regularly and keeps your mother's spirits up." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. 10-minute weekly calls versus 12 hours of daily hands-on care were being presented as comparable contributions. My social isolation had become nearly complete by this point. Former friends had stopped reaching out after months of declined invitations and brief, distracted conversations. My dating prospects were non-existent, confined as I was to my parents' home in a suburban neighborhood where I knew no one my age. The only regular social interactions I had outside family were with my mother's healthcare providers. During this period, Natalie's approach to our family situation became increasingly grating. She would call with unsolicited advice based on articles she'd read or podcasts about caregiving, presenting herself as equally invested in our mother's recovery despite her physical absence. "You really should be trying aquatic therapy," she suggested during one call. I was reading that it's revolutionary for stroke patients. I bit back the urge to ask who exactly would be taking our mother to these aquatic therapy sessions, given that Natalie was 500 miles away and I was already stretched beyond capacity. As my frustration mounted, I began to document my caregiving more systematically, partly as a way to maintain my sanity. I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every aspect of care I provided, from medication management to physical therapy, from driving to appointments to middle-of-the-night assistance. Alongside each task, I researched and noted the professional rate for equivalent services. What began as a personal validation exercise evolved into something more concrete. I found myself researching how professional caregivers structured their billing, what services were typically included in different care packages, and how families normally compensated relatives who provided long-term care. To my surprise, I discovered that many families with financial means similar to my parents had formal arrangements with family caregivers, including stipends, coverage of expenses, and clear agreements about time off and eventual transition plans. What I had assumed was normal, the expectation of indefinite unpaid family caregiving, was actually the exception rather than the rule in situations like ours. This research opened my eyes to just how thoroughly I was being taken advantage of. My parents had not only expected my sacrifice but had normalized it to the point where asking for any compensation or recognition felt somehow inappropriate, despite the enormous market value of the services I provided. One evening, after helping my mother complete her exercises and settle into bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, reviewing a job listing for a position similar to the one I had left behind in Seattle. The salary was impressive, the work aligned perfectly with my skills, and under normal circumstances I would have applied immediately. My father walked in as I was reading the requirements, and I didn't bother to hide the screen. "Looking for jobs?" he asked, his tone suggesting he found the idea premature. "Yes," I replied simply. "I need to start rebuilding my career at some point." He frowned. "Your mother still needs you here." "She's made incredible progress," I pointed out. "The doctors say she's ready for more independence." "Professional care is expensive," he countered. "And no one will care for her like family." In that moment, something inside me shifted. The subtle manipulation in his words, the unspoken expectation that I should continue sacrificing indefinitely while my sister received financial support for her mortgage, suddenly became intolerable. "What's your timeline for this, Dad?" I asked directly. "Another 6 months. A year. When exactly do you see me being able to resume my own life?" His expression darkened. "I didn't realize caring for your mother was such a burden that you needed an end date." And there it was, the guilt trip that had kept me compliant for months. The implication that wanting any life of my own was somehow selfish, that genuine love meant endless, uncompensated sacrifice. That night I made a decision. I would continue caring for my mother while secretly preparing for my eventual departure. I would apply for jobs, save what money I could, and most importantly, I would begin to advocate for myself in this family dynamic that had taken so much from me while giving so little in return. I had no idea then that events would soon force this simmering conflict to an explosive head, or that my parents were about to make a move that would forever change how I viewed my family and my place within it. The 1-year anniversary of my mother's stroke arrived with a small celebration. Her recovery, while not complete, was remarkable by any standard. She could now walk unassisted for short distances, manage most daily activities independently, and communicate effectively despite occasional word-finding difficulties. Her doctors called her progress exceptional and attributed much of it to the consistency and quality of care she had received at home. With this milestone came a natural transition point. I had begun actively job hunting, scheduling interviews for positions that would allow remote work initially as I transitioned back to full-time employment. I had even toured a few apartments in the area, planning to remain nearby for at least 6 more months while my mother continued outpatient therapy with reduced daily support from me. My parents seemed supportive of these steps, at least outwardly. My father nodded approvingly when I mentioned an upcoming interview, and my mother expressed pride in my dedication to getting back on my feet. I felt cautiously optimistic that we were moving toward a healthy resolution, one that would allow me to reclaim my life while maintaining the stronger family bonds that had developed during this challenging year. Then came the dinner that changed everything. My father suggested we have a family meeting over a home-cooked meal to discuss the future. I assumed this meant planning my mother's ongoing care and my gradual transition back to independence. I even felt a spark of hope that perhaps they would finally acknowledge my sacrifice in a meaningful way, offering some financial help as I rebuilt my life. Mom prepared her signature lasagna, a dish she hadn't been able to cook since before her stroke. The ability to create this meal independently represented a significant recovery milestone, and the symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. We sat around the dining room table, the scene almost painfully normal after a year of medical equipment and therapy schedules dominating our lives. After dinner, as I began clearing plates, my father cleared his throat and placed a manila folder on the table. "Edwin, your mother and I have been discussing your situation," he began, his accountant's formality in full effect. "As you prepare to move forward with your life, we thought it was important to settle accounts." I set down the plates confused. "Settle accounts?" He slid the folder toward me. "This is an itemized statement of the expenses we've incurred on your behalf during your stay with us." With a growing sense of disbelief, I opened the folder to find a meticulously prepared invoice. 12 months of rent for my childhood bedroom at a rate higher than I'd paid for my portion of the Seattle apartment. Utilities broken down by estimated usage. Food calculated to the dollar. Even charges for wear and tear on the family car that I'd used to drive my mother to medical appointments. The total at the bottom of the page: $15,842. I stared at the paper, certain this was some kind of terrible joke. When I looked up, my father's expression remained serious, expectant even. "You are billing me?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "We've provided room and board for a full year," he explained, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. "You're an adult, Edwin. We're not running a charity here." The phone on the table buzzed, and my father answered it on speaker. Natalie's voice filled the room. "Hi everyone. Did you have the financial discussion yet?" So she knew about this. Had perhaps even encouraged it. "We're discussing it now," my father replied. "Edwin, I know it seems strict," Natalie chimed in, her voice carrying that familiar condescending tone, "but if I had stayed there for a year, I would expect to contribute too." "It's just fair." "Contribute," I repeated, still struggling to process what was happening. "I gave up my career, my relationship, my home, my entire life to care for Mom. How is that not contributing?" "You would have had living expenses anywhere," my father countered. "We're simply accounting for the actual costs of having you here." "What about the value of the care I provided?" I asked, my shock beginning to transform into anger. "Do you have any idea what professional caregiving costs?" My mother, who had been silent until now, placed her hand on my father's arm. "Harold, perhaps we should." He cut her off. "Diane, we agreed on this. Edwin needs to understand that life has costs." Natalie's voice came through the speaker again. "Besides, I contributed too, you know. Emotional support is just as important as physical presence. I called every week, sent care packages." My father nodded. "Exactly." Natalie contributed emotionally while maintaining her own household. "You just lived here. Just lived here." The phrase struck me like a physical blow. In their minds, my round-the-clock care, the sacrifice of my entire life, equated to just living here. The depth of this mischaracterization was staggering. I looked at my mother, searching for some recognition of the injustice unfolding, but she avoided my gaze. Her silence was perhaps the deepest cut of all. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly and walking out the back door into the cool evening. In the backyard where I had played as a child, I paced for nearly an hour, alternating between disbelief, rage, and a profound sadness. How could my family so fundamentally misunderstand or devalue what I had done? Did they truly see my year of caregiving as equivalent to mooching off my parents? When I finally went back inside, the house was quiet. My parents had gone to bed, leaving the invoice prominently on the kitchen counter with a post-it note. "Please let us know your payment plan." That night I lay awake until dawn, my mind racing. As the first light of morning filtered through my window, a clarity emerged through the emotional fog. If my parents wanted to frame this as a business transaction, then perhaps it was time to show them exactly what the services I had provided would have cost on the open market. The following morning, I skipped breakfast and drove to the local office supply store when it opened. I purchased high-quality resume paper, a professional folder, and a pack of clear document sleeves. Then I stopped at a coffee shop with my laptop and spent the next 4 hours creating what would become my response to my parents' invoice. Using the detailed logs I had kept, professional rate research I had conducted, and additional market data I gathered that morning, I created a comprehensive, professional-looking invoice for 12 months of caregiving services. The document began with a formal header. Professional caregiving services provided by Edwin Carson, March 2024 to March 2025. Below that, I created an itemized breakdown of services rendered. Skilled nursing care. 4,380 hours, 12 hours daily, at $35. Overnight on-call supervision. 2,920 hours, at $20 hour. Physical therapy assistance. 1,095 sessions at $50 session. Medication management. 1,095 instances at $25 instance. Transportation to medical appointments. 156 trips at $35 trip. Meal preparation according to dietary requirements. 1,095 meals at $15 meal. Household management and cleaning. 365 days at $75 day. Care coordination with medical professionals. 52 instances at $75 instance. The subtotal came to $296,680. From this amount, I deducted fair market value for room and board. Shared family housing. 12 months at $800 month. Food and utilities. 12 months at $400 month. Transportation costs. Estimated at $1,200 total. Total deductions. $15,600. Final balance due. $281,080. Beside the financial calculations, I prepared supporting documentation. Photographs of medication schedules I had managed, therapy logs I had maintained, doctor's notes praising the exceptional home care my mother had received. I included printouts of current market rates for professional caregiving services in our area, highlighting how my calculations were actually conservative compared to agency rates for 24/7 care. I also prepared a letter from my mother's neurologist, which she had given me after my mother's last appointment, stating that the consistent, high-quality home care had likely saved her from at least 6 months in a specialized nursing facility, an expense that would have cost upwards of $90,000. I organized everything in the professional folder with clear sleeves protecting each document. The presentation was impeccable, resembling the kind of business proposal I might have prepared in my former career. That evening, I called a family meeting of my own. My father looked mildly annoyed at the interruption to his evening routine, but my mother seemed to sense something significant was about to happen. I asked my father to call Natalie on speakerphone so she could be part of this important discussion. When everyone was present, I placed my folder on the coffee table next to my father's invoice from the previous night. "I've been thinking about your bill," I began calmly, "and I agree that we should settle our accounts. In fact, I think it's important that we have complete financial transparency about the arrangement of the past year." My father nodded, apparently pleased that I was being reasonable. Natalie made an approving sound through the speaker. "However," I continued, "if we're going to treat this as a business arrangement rather than a family matter, then I need to make sure all services and contributions are properly valued." I opened the folder and handed my father the invoice I had created. His expression remained neutral as he took the document, but his face paled as he began to read. My mother, reading over his shoulder, gasped audibly. "What's happening?" Natalie demanded through the speaker. "Dad, Edwin has presented us with a counter-invoice," my father said, his voice uncharacteristically weak. "For what?" Natalie asked. For the market value of the professional caregiving services I provided for the past year, I explained, my voice remaining calm and matter of fact. If you're itemizing what I owe you, it's only fair that I itemize what you owe me. This is absurd, my father sputtered, but there was no conviction in his voice as his eyes remained fixed on the six-figure total at the bottom of the page. Is it? I asked, opening the folder further to reveal the supporting documentation. Because I have market rate data, time logs, and medical testimonials that say otherwise. In fact, I've been quite conservative in my estimates. I began walking them through each line item, explaining the market rates and showing evidence of the services provided. I pointed out how my round-the-clock care had prevented the need for a specialized nursing facility, saving them tens of thousands of dollars beyond what insurance would have covered. The average cost of skilled in-home care for a stroke patient is between $25 and $40 per hour depending on medical training requirements, I explained. For 24/7 care through an agency, you're looking at over $300,000 per year. I've actually given you a substantial family discount. As I continued my presentation, my father's face transitioned from shock to something resembling shame. My mother began to quietly cry. Through the speaker, Natalie had fallen completely silent. Of course, I concluded, I don't actually expect you to pay me nearly $300,000. Unlike some people, I don't view family support as a transaction to be invoiced. The statement hung in the air, its implications impossible to miss. But I do want you to understand what my sacrifice has been worth in actual market terms. This isn't about me just living here. This is about me providing skilled, dedicated care that would have cost you an enormous amount if you'd had to pay professionals. I closed the folder and sat back, watching as my parents exchanged glances, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. They looked like ghosts of themselves, the reality of what they had done finally sinking in. My father opened his mouth several times to speak, but no words came out. My mother reached for my hand across the table, but I gently moved it away. The time for easy reconciliation had passed. I'll give you some time to review the documentation, I said, standing up. We can discuss this further when you've had a chance to process everything. As I walked upstairs to my room, I heard my father quietly ask Natalie to call back later. The rustle of papers told me they were going through my meticulous documentation, confronting the undeniable evidence of just how profoundly they had undervalued my contribution. For the first time in a year, I slept deeply, the weight of unspoken resentment finally lifted. Whatever happened next, I had stood up for myself and made visible what had been conveniently invisible to my family. The true value of what I had given. The morning after I presented my counter invoice, the atmosphere in the house was heavy with unspoken tension. I came downstairs to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table, looking as though they had barely slept. My father's eyes were red-rimmed, a state I had rarely seen him in throughout my life. Edwin, he began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone, your mother and I need to speak with you. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from them waiting. We spent much of the night talking, my father continued. And his voice broke unexpectedly, I owe you an apology. We both do. My mother reached across the table, tears in her eyes. What your father is trying to say is that we failed to recognize the magnitude of what you've done for us, for me. My father pulled out both invoices, his and mine, and tore them in half with deliberate movements. This was never about money, was it? No, I confirmed. It was about recognition and respect. About acknowledging that I put my entire life on hold to help Mom recover, and that sacrifice has real value beyond just living here. My father nodded slowly. I think, on some level, it was easier to minimize what you gave up than to face the enormity of our debt to you. If what you did was just what any son would do, then we didn't have to feel quite so beholden. This unexpected self-awareness surprised me. My father had rarely been one for emotional introspection. When your mother had her stroke, he continued, his voice unsteady, I was terrified. Not just of losing her, but of how our lives would change, of the financial burden, of having to reduce my work hours when we needed income most. When you stepped in, it felt like a miracle solution. So much so that I think I deliberately avoided acknowledging the true cost to you. My mother, who had been quietly crying, spoke up. I knew, Edwin. Every day I saw what you were sacrificing. But I felt caught between my need for care and my concern for you. I told myself it was temporary, that once I was better, you could resume your life. And then when that time came, I said nothing when your father presented that horrible bill. Her honesty opened something in me that had been tightly closed. Why didn't you say anything? Fear, she admitted simply. Fear of being a burden, fear of conflict, fear of ending up in a nursing home if you left. It was selfish, and I'm deeply ashamed. The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. My father answered and put it on speaker. It was Natalie. Have you talked to Edwin yet? She asked, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. We're talking now, my father replied. Edwin, Natalie said, I owe you an apology too. Dad forwarded me your documentation last night. I had no idea what you were really doing there day to day. I think I convinced myself that my weekly calls and occasional care packages were somehow comparable because that was all I could offer without upending my life. But the truth is, you upended yours, and I didn't want to face what that meant about my choices. Her admission was unexpected. Natalie had rarely acknowledged any shortcoming in her approach to family matters. The mortgage assistance, I said, addressing my father. That was what really hurt. You told me we couldn't afford professional help while sending money to Natalie every month. My father winced. Another failure on my part. I compartmentalized those decisions, told myself one had nothing to do with the other. It was wrong, and it sent a terrible message about how I valued each of you. Over the next several days, our conversations continued, sometimes painful but increasingly healing. My parents proposed a new arrangement. They would help me find and furnish an apartment nearby and provide financial assistance while I secured a new job. My father offered to use his business connections to help with my job search, and my mother insisted on returning the amount of their original bill plus an additional sum to help me rebuild my savings. Most surprisingly, Natalie called with an unexpected offer. Jake and I have discussed it, and I'd like to come stay for a month this summer to take over Mom's care so you can take a real vacation. You deserve it, and it's long overdue for me to contribute in a meaningful way. Family therapy followed, a suggestion from my mother that would have seemed impossible before these events. In those sessions, we explored the deeper patterns that had led to such profound misunderstandings and established healthier boundaries and expectations going forward. Through these difficult conversations, I learned important lessons about family, sacrifice, and self-worth. I realized that martyrdom isn't love, and that allowing yourself to be taken advantage of serves neither you nor the people you care for. True family support requires mutual respect and recognition, not endless sacrifice from one member while others minimize their contributions. Within 2 months, I had secured a new position with a tech company that allowed partial remote work, giving me flexibility to remain involved in my mother's ongoing recovery while rebuilding my career. My father helped me find an affordable apartment just 15 minutes from their home, and even helped with moving expenses and furniture. Perhaps most meaningfully, my parents hung a framed letter in their living room, a testimonial from my mother's neurologist attributing her remarkable recovery directly to the quality of home care she had received. Beneath it, they added their own words of gratitude for my sacrifice, a daily reminder of what had nearly been taken for granted. 1 year after the Invoice incident, we gathered for dinner to celebrate my mother's continued recovery and my recent promotion. The family dynamic had transformed. My contributions were acknowledged regularly and without prompting. Natalie had become more actively involved, scheduling regular visits and taking on meaningful responsibilities rather than just making brief calls. As we sat around the table, my mother raised her glass with her once paralyzed hand, now steady enough to hold it without assistance. To Edwin, she said, who taught us that family isn't about keeping score, but also isn't about taking advantage of those who give the most. Looking around at the faces of my family, I realized that while the path had been painful, it had led to something authentic and balanced. I had learned to value myself within my family system, to set boundaries without abandoning love, and to require respect without demanding perfection. The experience changed me fundamentally. I became more direct about my needs and expectations, not just with family but in all relationships. I learned that genuine love includes honest communication, even when that communication is difficult. Most importantly, I discovered that self-respect and family loyalty can coexist, that caring for others doesn't require erasing yourself. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share this with someone who might be struggling to set boundaries with loved ones. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that true family relationships should lift us up, not drain us dry.